In 2023, Winstone Wallboards will open its new jib plasterboard manufacturing and distribution facility in Tauriko, Tauranga. Built on 12.8 hectares of land, it will be 2.5 times bigger than the current site. Designed with sustainability at the forefront, the new plant will have extensive recycling capability on site for water and waste. It will also include new state-of-the-art technology and equipment, enabling the business to manufacture the full range of our jib plasterboard products with a high degree of flexibility. The new Winstone Wallboards facility reinforces our commitment to manufacturing in New Zealand, and we look forward to sharing this journey with you.
Talofa lava, kia ora koutou katoa. And thank you so much for tuning in when Dr. Ashley Bloomfield might have commanded your attention. This is the third conversation in the University of Auckland School of Architecture and Planning Spring Fast Forward 2021 series. And thanks to JIB for their sponsorship. The series triumphs over COVID adversity, technology transcending social and physical distancing, and connecting with exceptional alumni. It is organised by Julia Gatley and myself on behalf of the school's History and Theory Research Hub. We began with Mark Wigley, Professor Mark Wigley in Spain, and last week, Dr. Elizabeth Farrelly in Australia. And tonight we join Jude Kohlhase, resident in the Philippines, though in Dunedin for the duration of COVID. And he is in conversation with Professor Jenny Dixon and myself. Jenny is a professor of planning and now provost of Universitas 21, a global collaboration of research-led universities. And she was until recently Deputy Vice Chancellor at the University of Auckland, responsible for strategic engagement. And for developing research and teaching relationships across the world, emphasizing the Pacific and Asia, and recognizing New Zealand's close geopolitical ties. Associations with the university's alumni diaspora are critical and valued. During tonight's conversation, we do invite questions from the audience, so please use your Zoom Q&A function if you have any. Jude Kohlhase is a glittering university alumnus in planning, and now, which is now rebranded urban planning. It's changed since we started, and in engineering. A Samoan New Zealander, he has traversed the greater Pacific Asia region in education and in professional focus. And he's now a senior urban development specialist in the Asian Development Bank. The warmest welcome, Jude, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. So, before we get onto your reflections on life in the now, I thought we might begin at the beginning and your childhood, mostly in Samoa, which is an idyllic Pacific paradise to most of us, at least the prospective tourists. Might you tell us a wee bit about those formative years?
Well, thank you, Elizabeth, and certainly thank you to Professor Jennifer Dixon for today's event and for identifying me to be involved in this alumni discussion. I really appreciate the opportunity. It's been going on 20 years since I left the University of Auckland with a bachelor's degree, so I'm honored and privileged by being called on to offer my reflections over the years. So thank you for that. As you asked, yeah, my formative years were both in New Zealand and Samoa. I went to elementary school in Western Samoa at a period when, you know, you're just youthful and engaged in typical activities, whether it's in the village or on the sports field, just typical average childhood upbringing. It wasn't until I think it was 1984 when we migrated to New Zealand, where I started school in Mount Ross School in a primary school, and then on to secondary intermediate. So yeah, I think those early years had a lot to do with my own characteristics and a drive where I was able to identify possible areas of career development, looking around my family and the enabling environment. You know, you're always looking for role models to emulate, and there were a couple in the family that certainly stood out, that provided a pathway for me and created an outlook that maybe I wouldn't have had if I hadn't had that support from the family.
So yeah, that's great. You had your senior schooling in New Zealand, and I understand you actually contemplated dentistry. What persuaded you into planning?
So I was back and forth between high schools and in Samoa, where I spent my final years of secondary school. You know, you've got an opportunity to achieve merit and therefore be qualified for scholarships. And those are certainly the targets for us young students. And so my interest in dentistry was probably picked up from an older brother who also studied dentistry in America. So I was looking at that subject to be where I was headed towards. Now the government of Samoa has, you know, only a small opportunities for various disciplines and priority needs for the development of the country. And dentistry is not included, although medicine is very important. It wasn't considered one of the priorities where the government would offer that support. So I was also doing well in geography and in that area of urban geography. So this opportunity was asked of me to look into the urban planning program in the University of Auckland. And I thought, you know, as these opportunities are very rare, scholarship being funded through the government of Samoa, I took on that challenge. And yeah, a different pathway from what I had envisaged.
But much more fun.
It's led me, yeah, it's led me to places where I never would have contemplated. And I don't think any other field would have given me that opportunity to travel.
I have much the same feeling about planning. It was almost an unknown, and then it takes you into such an expansion of possibilities. So can you remember, do you have any reflections on your years when you were actually at university here as a young man?
Yeah, so, you know, first year of university, the daunting thing about it is coming from Samoa, where the standard may not be as high as our New Zealand counterparts. Certainly my first year were a period of trying to gauge where, you know, you fit into the whole curriculum and how you benchmark against your peers. So there was that nervousness, but also the fear of, if you were to fail, you lose this opportunity. So there was a strong drive to do well. And surprisingly, I was pleased with some of the results that encouraged me to do more of the same. And in saying that, I had some really fun lecturers in my first year where I thought, hey, look, this is an area that has a lot of weight in and critical importance to the development of communities and society. So I thought, hey, look, you know, it's an opportunity to learn more about. So I stuck through the 4-year course and obviously mingled with a lot of great teachers and lecturers during my period there. Some of our former students or staff may recall, but people like Tom Fuchs and Bruce Hucker were standout people in my mind very early on. And then others came along, with the legal framework with Prue Taylor, Robert Guild with infrastructure planning. There was a range of different elements to stimulate the thought process and just got me more engaged in planning.
So then you returned to Samoa and you joined the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment. And in no time at all, you worked your way to the top. You're becoming the principal planner and ultimately the assistant chief executive officer planning. So what drew you back to Samoa? And in hindsight, what were the highlights of that particular phase of your career?
I really appreciated the opportunity that the government gave me and funded my scholarship. So, there is a sense of obligation to return and serve for the country. I was very fortunate that there were positions available and they were looking at developing the planning system in Samoa. So you didn't feel like it wasn't a unwelcome degree. You didn't feel like there was no role for you to play in government. I wasn't looking at the private sector at that point in time. I felt that the basic framework of planning per se needed to exist for the private sector to operate a little bit more smoother. So I saw a real big opportunity to work with the government through at the time, the Department of Land Survey and Environment. And then we went through a lot of restructuring. Early 2000, the public service was going through a lot of reforms, a lot of good reforms, which saw the development of urban planning with the support of the international financial institutions such as the Asian Development Bank. That was my first introduction. And then also separately, there's parallel projects run by the various ministries where the environment plays a critical role in trying to coordinate and facilitate that development outcome. So there was a lot of motivation for me to come back and experience that. And in saying that, I did put out a few feelers before I left, just to test the market before I did go back. But I think I made the right choice going back to Samoa, serving the community, serving the government, and then making a real go of our planning system. The legislation was passed. This organization, which didn't exist, it was a one-man band when I joined, with loosely aligned objectives without any institutional or statutory teeth. So yeah, it was a real great time to be involved in planning after being exposed at university about the theories and the various development aspects, but then seeing it happen on the ground and being part of that was pretty exciting.
And I understand from people in Apia that you're still greatly missed, actually, Jude. So you managed to combine that time, actually, with higher qualifications. So you whizzed off and got a Master of Urban and Regional Planning from the University of Hawaii. And you had stints at the US House of Representatives. I kind of thought it must have been in the Bush era, actually. You went to the Wharton School of Business and the Florida Public Utility Research Center. And finally, you tootled back here and got a first-class Master in Engineering at the University of Auckland in Engineering Studies and Construction. So what attracted you to the States?
I saw it as an opportunity again, with if you're familiar, the opportunity for scholarships are out there, and development of civil service and even private sector employees are quite available. So I was quite keen to try a different region, and thinking of planning in America, I thought, hey, look, this is an opportunity that I wouldn't get. So I was focused on trying to get a degree in the University of Hawaii and get that exposure, that, firsthand of how it operates in the US. So I was very fortunate to spend 2 years there. Again, some very distinguished professors who helped steer me along the way, looking at the developments there, and certainly the exposure had by interning with the US Capitol at the time. It was also an eye-opener to be involved in the political discussions at that particular time.
Yeah, it must have been fascinating. And yeah, so why did you turn to the dark side, to engineering?
Well, funny you say that. I mean, as a planner, you kind of go through these points of discovery, I guess, where you probably should build on some skill sets to strengthen your abilities in the field. And I was certainly looking at, one was urban design, thinking whether I should engage in that aspect of the discipline, or whether I should get more involved in engineering. And the way I saw my career strategically would be through an engineering degree to help strengthen the technical abilities with the roles that I had been playing, and the development impact that we would have on the ground for a wider community. So that drew me to getting a degree in engineering, and in particular construction management. Going through the process is quite revealing, and also beneficial for the client as well, or the beneficiaries that you're working with, to arrive at a result that looks at both an urban planning perspective and how infrastructure affects communities, and then looking at the nitty-gritty of getting the work done and built. So I thought that would provide very good ammunition in my skill sets to do a little bit more.
Sounds as though you were the ultimate planner too, and you were very, very strategic and conscious in terms of, of career development. And I was just interested because in 2013, you departed RPF for Manila. Probably a significant disruption to your family, but nonetheless, and such a wonderful opportunity. So yeah, what enticed you to the ADB?
With the exposure working for the government for over 13 years, you get to sit shoulder to shoulder with a lot of the professionals, either in the World Bank, the European Investment Bank, or the Asian Development Bank. So you're working with these professionals on a day-to-day basis, and a thought struck me, hey, look, it might be interesting to see a Pacific face on the other side. So I thought the diversity angle would certainly help, bringing a perspective to the Pacific community with a Pacific person sitting on the bank side and supporting our region. So that was one of the drivers for me. And then being recruited through the Asian Development Bank, I was fortunate to be based in the Pacific office in Fiji. So I didn't have to move that far, but I did have to adjust to the cultural norms of a bigger institution. So yeah, that was an exciting time as well, getting exposed to other Pacific Island country development needs, and being part of the process to, provide the assistance needed to support, certain areas, whether it's through transport, urban planning, water supply, or sewage, or even energy, as was the case too. in some of our projects. So yeah, it was also an opportunity to try something different, but also test myself and move on to another challenge and come at it from a different angle.
Well, as you move out into that wider arena, I'm going to hand you over to Professor Jenny Dixon.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Hello for Jude. Look, I'm sure all the people watching the webinar tonight would be really keen to hear a little bit more about your current role at the Asian Development Bank. I mean, you've acquired a wonderful array of skills and qualifications to really prepare you for your work. But I think we'd be really interested to hear a little bit more about what you are actually doing in South Asia.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. So South Asia region is quite large. A couple of projects here and there across various sectors, but I'll focus more on the urban and water division, which I currently am in. So we're largely focused on urban planning initiatives to make cities livable. So there is an element of integrated development to incorporate a multi-sectoral approach in a lot of our project investment work. So ADB, or my particular role at this point in time, is identifying the need and developing a project proposal where we work hand in hand with the client to develop a project with ADB financing to support the implementation of the program. More currently, we're dealing with Bhutan in an affordable housing development project. We're scoping out various components to build a modest amount of homes with a new client and building the capacity of the local institution there around how they deliver housing, but also how they operate and maintain these homes. And then on the other spectrum in India, we're dealing a lot with rural water supply based off, the federal government's drive around drinking water supply to all of India by 2024. So we're trying to catch up and support various states, and in particular the Himachal Pradesh state, where I'm currently working in developing a rural water supply project, 120 million, and hopefully deploy that over a 5-year period. And then on the other end of a project cycle, we get involved in the evaluation and the project closure or completion end of project, and we analyze how well we've done in terms of achieving the outputs and how effective we were, both the client and the bank, identifying what efficiency issues there may have been, sustainability concerns, if any, which are largely the case in low capacity countries where we currently work in. So trying to build in either funding mechanisms to ensure that they are able to sustain over a period of time and get that assurance from the government, whether it's through taxes or tariffs or even grant transfers by the federal or central level government. So in a nutshell, we try and package various products, pull it together with the client, agree on the framework moving forward. We present that to our board, and this usually takes 4 to 6 months to prepare. We get board approval, and then we move on through to implementation, support the client through that process.
So it's really interesting thinking about South Asia and some of the issues that you're engaging with. And when we reflect back here to this country, we've got really big debates on the future of our ports, on reforming 3 waters, upgrading our physical infrastructure, thinking about urban intensification, housing affordability, impacts of climate change on both farming practices, and of course our urban lifestyles. So in fact, we actually do have much in common in terms of the kind of really, I think, the scale of the issues that we're all grappling with. And I think we're all in a period of transition, but I'm interested, before we perhaps return to some of those issues, just how you see the South Asia region grappling with the impacts of COVID, and how that's affected some of the work that you've been doing at the Asian Development Bank.
Yeah, it's certainly unprecedented times, and it's thrown in a lot of uncertainty in the region and for the governments also for their planning purposes. So it does have a real impact at the macro level, even down to the community level, where people may not have access to jobs or even able to pay bills in terms of whether it's housing or whether it's utilities. So there is a strong need for that support. The clients that we work with, the government acknowledge that and are looking for that support. Now, the bank and most of the development partners offer a range of support in a time like this. There's areas where there's COVID recovery support around budgetary support, and that just feeds into the government's purse to try and continue its services as best it can. Now, it also recognizes that, in terms of trying to get a project investment on board, some of these discussions happen 3 to 4 years in advance, and the preparation cycle's already happened. So there can be delays to that, which we see. We get project staff also affected by COVID personally and directly, where, it does slow people down. So we're certainly cognizant of the impact it has on a personal level with our interactions with the client and their team. So factoring a COVID factor in our processing is certainly something that's recognized and needed to be acknowledged. Now, in saying that, we're also pushed to the limit to try and get as much done as soon as possible, given that these needs are real. And getting the services on the ground is an ultimate priority. And say, for example, with the water sector projects, with COVID and the hygiene aspects, they go hand in hand in trying to work through a prevention program to ensure that people stay aware and alert of how to behave and practices during this COVID period if the vaccination rates aren't as high. Now, some of the coping mechanisms, say, for example, in landlocked countries such as Bhutan or Nepal, you're seeing a lot more closed borders. And in certain regions, you flick the switch where some will go into an enhanced quarantine phase or levels, as we have in New Zealand, where they're trying to control movement and people's safety. So these factors we're seeing in South Asia are almost what we're seeing here. Now, New Zealand has it a lot luckier, say, for example, if we're looking at India and their rate of infection and the deaths that we're seeing there. So it's certainly something that we've acknowledged. The institution has also set up different modalities to support the developing member countries. And as project teams, we're here to try and get the investments approved and then on the ground as soon as possible.
So there's some pretty big challenges, really, for organizations like the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank when you are confronted with the kind of problems that you see in the region that you're engaged in. And I can recall when I was in India in 2019, there was very, very severe pollution, for example, in Delhi, and it had been created by farmers burning off stubble as part of their farming practices. And of course, it was having a very, very significant and serious impact in air quality in Delhi. In fact, apparently it was only actually a more recent problem. So I'm not quite sure quite what accounted for that. But I mean, how do we deal with that kind of the sort of levels of transformation that we need to undertake if you're thinking about the rural economies in a place like India? How do we really go about thinking, how do we go about changing those practices in order to try and improve things like air quality?
Well, that's probably a real tough one, especially when you're dealing with these rural communities that have no other alternative. And then if you've got industries that are also in that periphery that are also emitting, maybe there's a level of control that could happen. I can also lay claim to have seen the transboundary effect of the air quality in Pakistan. So it doesn't just limit itself to India. Right. And it's almost, it's a difficult one to get a grip of. Certainly regulating the industries, enforcing what can happen, and maybe from a planning side, whether these industries should be and could be encouraged into other areas where maybe you've got that regulatory control of the standards that are being emitted in terms of the air particle emissions. But then also just trying to follow through on what kind of support could be had at the household level. And these are small scale households that may not be akin to that level of control. Yeah. So you probably need to find some more terms.
I mean, it's very exciting kind of having someone who's a planner engaged in those kind of issues and problems, which are massive, but it's also about being part and parcel of ultimately what will be, transformation of economies going forward. So it's a really, I do think it's a really exciting opportunity to be right in the thick of all of that. Now, there's another example that comes to me, and it's around, I guess, coming out of COVID. We have seen that the ports, for example, in South Asia and elsewhere, have become very much more strategic given the value of shipping. And I know that there's been some new business models developed in South Asia around ports. And I wondered how you see that and how you see those ways of operating influencing economic development in these regions.
Yeah, no, cities themselves are, the cusp of this urbanization trend where you're seeing a lot of growth happening, and we're always looking at developments that can stimulate economic opportunities across the city environments. Certainly ports play a big role. I'm probably not the person to speak on the particular role it would have, coming from an urban and water perspective. I think our motivations now are around transit-oriented developments and value-captured financing, where you kind of look at strategic locations where you can encourage certain activities, mixed uses to stimulate certain economic activities, and then finding ways to, I guess, identify revenue streams for either the government or businesses that would have a sustainable impact for their long-term operation. definitely a topic.
Yeah, yes, it's a really important topic, I think, going forward. South Asia, of course, presents massive opportunities for New Zealand. And do you have any advice for New Zealanders doing business in this region in terms of the sorts of the knowledge that they need to go into these countries, and thinking about their cultural competence, what they need to know about negotiating sort of interculturally with businesses in these regions? And the context of this, of course, is that we are hearing a lot more about the need to diversify our business overseas, and this applies also not only to business, but of course international education, as we're looking at our sources of international education. And there's certainly opportunities in places like India and Sri Lanka for that, for students and those sorts of things. So I'm just interested in the kind of advice you might give to people wanting to conduct and business in this region, as to what sort of things do they need to look out for?
Another tough one. The area is so diverse, and trying to get a grip of the cultural norms in a particular country, and even your counterparts that you deal with, is, I guess, like you said, it is something that we need to be aware of, and certainly leaving a good first impression leaves a lasting impact for continued businesses. I've noticed in my travels through Pakistan, where there's a strong sense of pride in New Zealand, and in particular the way the New Zealand Prime Minister handled the mosque shootings recently. So the profile I've noticed is quite renowned, as she has, paved the way of how genuine, how sincere New Zealanders are. And I think that's been a positive influence on how people interact with New Zealanders. The bank that we work with is obviously a Japanese bank, and the norms are quite subtle, but being aware of the dynamics, as you talk to colleagues about how to adjust certain mannerisms and styles, is certainly something that people need to pay attention to. But in saying that too, you can have some very great relationships and friendships develop in the region, and I've seen that firsthand, where the bonds that you make are quite strong, and there are a range of international folk that work in the region, both New Zealand, Australia, that find it quite rewarding working in this region. So I would encourage, and we're always on the lookout for consultants to help us in our work in the region. And there have been some old hands that are continually engaged. But if there are people in the audience or others in the university that are looking for international exposure, there's opportunities to engage and see what can be done. And I think you'd find it quite enriching, the kinds of clients that you deal with, very committed to getting the job done, passionate about what they do, knowledgeable about what needs to be done. So they provide that local context, and the New Zealand experience certainly should elevate problem solving for our clients, or providing services to the region.
What would you see as the biggest kind of planning challenges in your region? And and I know we're taking a very broad view here, big macro region. It's enormously large and populated, but what would you sort of single out as perhaps some of the really big planning challenges in South Asia? Then I think we'll come back and we'll touch on Pacific. We'll come back to the Pacific in a minute.
I still believe, and I mentioned this, urbanization is growing at an alarming rate where you need a lot of coordination amongst various institutions, and then trying to deliver the services and not having, these systems trip over themselves. I think that this is certainly a strong area where you've seen the countries in the region asking for that level of support, whether it's reviewing their existing systems, reviewing their structure plans, their sectoral development plans, and then putting some value in terms of how do you implement and resource these needs. So these are conversations that I saw a decade ago that are still relevant now, and even more so as population increase. And you're seeing the expansion of cities in these countries encroach on scarce land resources. So there's a real discussion point where you need to look at options and finding out what's best for that context in direct communication and partnership with the client. And we're also encouraged to reach down even further to the grassroots to make sure that there's that participatory approach where they're engaged in the process of development. So you're seeing a real need, and the urban space is diverse and covers a range of sectors, whether it's power, housing, water supply, wastewater, transportation. And it's just trying to get a grip on how do you control or offer to manage that growth, and the governance around it.
Yep. Let's come back and talk a little bit about the Pacific, because of course we have a very close relationship with the Pacific, with many Pacific peoples living in Tamaki Makaurau and elsewhere in New Zealand. There are lots of players now the Pacific's our largest ocean. It's hugely important. It's got a lot of strategic importance. There are many players, big nations all involved. We're even seeing Britain show interest in the Pacific, which seems a bit ironic. How do you see New Zealand's support for various issues in the Pacific playing out? How do people in the Pacific perhaps regard what we're doing, and how effective is it in terms of our support for some of the issues that are currently pretty important in the Pacific, such as climate change, public health, economic development? There are many issues, I think, which are quite challenging in the Pacific.
No, thank you, Jen. I think, the disclaimer is it's purely a reflection and what I've seen, and certainly from my engagement in the Pacific with the New Zealand government or the New Zealand aid program. That's something that I've found to be welcomed. You see their engagement up front in dialogue with countries, and there's development partner forums where you're engaging and trying to coordinate as best you can across the different groups at the table, and trying to build on each other's strengths. So it's not trying to, I guess, carve out your piece and say, look, this is our territory, but working together to deliver a result for the client that's in the best interest of the country. And we've seen that, in Fiji, in Samoa, in places like Kiribati, where they're a respected aid partner. And, there's this particular area where New Zealand would focus in on, where I've seen, say, for example, in Kiribati, where it's sanitation, certainly the health sector is also an important one. And that's something that I think we should all be grateful for. That level of support is needed in places where there's just not enough revenue to support government operations. And I've seen this with New Zealand, where in Samoa we try to engage very upfront spatial planning exercise through the New Zealand office, and that was through great support and championing within the government. And we saw that happen with the Apia waterfront, so it came to fruition where little dialogue, can lead to a result in these countries that I think New Zealand can be proud of. Certainly more could be done. It is, our back doorstep, so to speak, and the huge population of Pacific Islanders that are here in New Zealand, and certainly that community is very strong. I think they're doing great work and just trying to coordinate as best they can, and we're certainly supportive of that effort. Like I said, it's strategic, trying to coordinate everyone's involvement at various positions so that we can maximize people's strengths. So say, for example, if New Zealand's doing some due diligence or some sectoral assessments up front, say, for example, the bank could also come in and pick up off that work and identify, okay, where are the recommendations where it could result in an investment project that the bank could get involved in and support the country. And if the country does see that as a priority, that engagement with the various partners is something that is a huge success. And we see it evidently in the Pacific more so than any other place.
So what would your advice to planners, be who wanted to specialize in the area of infrastructure planning and development, and also think about working abroad? What would you think, reflecting back on your career, which has been incredibly rich, and you've gone off and you've done further qualifications to strengthen your background, which I think is very impressive. So you've really thought very strategically about your career. But what advice would you perhaps give to planners who are perhaps not long out of university, thinking about what they might do, where they might go? They're interested in working abroad, thinking about Asia Pacific as a place where they might work for a few years, get to know grapple with some really interesting, challenging issues. What do you think's really important in terms of the kind of, not just the skills, but the personal attributes of people working in these areas? What is important in terms of the kind of outlook and attitude that you need to have as an outsider going in and working in another country?
I think if someone has identified a career, whether it's in the international community, I remember a couple of classes with Robert Riddell at the time, where you hear about the World Bank, you hear about the activity in the Pacific and globally, and so that started giving me some signals. Okay, well, that's out there for me as a career path. And that, I guess, sparked some interest. I would encourage current students to, first of all, complete the degree. It really does make a difference to get you in the door. And then if you're able to develop some level of experience, and that can only happen by doing, some tough jobs. My career in the government of Samoa started off as, typical government employee earning 11,000 tala a year, which is significantly low compared to what you would earn in New Zealand. I think the starting rate was around 45,000 to 50,000 New Zealand dollars. So if you're not driven by the financial rewards, I think the investment upfront with getting the experience is going to be a tremendous benefit in the long term. But then also voicing your aspirations, in terms of where you'd like to be, so that people are there to support you along that pathway, whether it's your employer or whether it's through mentors at the university. These were all areas where I found a lot of support. And to be honest, I needed that, both from the University of Auckland's planning school, both from my employer, and that gave me a broader view of the horizon. And I think as a personal attribute, Pacific Islanders pretty, generally soft-spoken and quite kind-hearted people. So I think having a sincere and genuine outlook with the interactions that you do have really does have an impact on who you're dealing with and the relationships you build. I think we can't underestimate the impact of having, very strong relationships, and that's certainly something that's come across for me as strong. I've seen a variety of styles over the years, and all successful in their own right, but you could, have characteristics where are quite aggressive, and you leave a trail of broken shells. But, yeah.
It's those soft skills that can be so important in these situations, and not anywhere, in fact. Probably in any part of the world that we might be working in, but it's really understanding, being empathetic, being able to read people, listening, and having a sense of culture, what we call now these days cultural competence, that we didn't talk about this so much 20 years ago when we were teaching students, I think. But we've become a lot more conscious of just the importance of relationship building, and that's where so many things really start, from having a good constructive relationship that's of value to both parties, or if there's multiple parties, because you need such consensus when you're grappling with such big issues like urbanization or rural transformation or whatever it is. It takes so much, I think, engagement and goodwill and consensus and commitment from so many different parties, and I think it's just so exciting to see someone like yourself right in the heart of dealing with some very big issues that are of such importance as we kind of work our way through the outcome of COVID, as we deal with things like economic transformation. So I think at this point I might throw it back to Elizabeth, who may have one or two more wrap-up questions she wants to ask you.
Well, I'm just wondering where your strategic plan is going next. What's your long-term plan, Jude, if you have one?
The immediate probably is a little bit more tangible, in terms of just trying to do a good job in delivering for our clients. So yeah, over the next 3 years, certainly that's on my agenda. The bank has quite a range of opportunities, and you see that through different positions, and you could, even become a country director, where you're outposted to, say, a country specific. So there's certainly some opportunities in the future where, if given the opportunity, I'd certainly raise my hand up for. And in the interim, just trying to build the skill sets needed in that type of role. So looking at corporate finance, financial analysis, these are all, and even economics as well, are all handy to have up your sleeve. And I think, yeah, that would probably be over the next 10 years where I see myself. Now, going back to Samoa is probably also a consideration after gaining this level of experience, to see how else, towards the twilight, when I've still got a lot of energy to contribute even more. I think that's an opportunity as well.
If I could just make a comment here, when I went to Samoa with our alumni trips, I was really struck by the number of actually University of Auckland alumni returning to Samoa after many years away, but going back and really contributing to the local economy. And I just thought that was really fabulous, actually. And a lot of very senior women actually occupying very senior jobs. Also, I've noticed in Apia. So that again, going back and really contributing. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, and it's home, so you do want to go back to family and contribute, and pay homage, I guess, to that opportunity granted over 25 years ago. So there's a lot of respect also given to that period and the opportunities that it's presented. So yeah, good to go back.
And it's warmer. What's it like to live in Manila?
Congestion's probably the standout. So if you've heard about traffic there in Manila, where you've got 10 million people hovering around, you've got mega malls. So this was another discussion we had back in school in 96, 99, that these mega malls were a driving force in these economies. So you see it firsthand in Manila as well. So it's air pollution, quality of life is quite different. You need to get out of town to enjoy the Philippines. I mean, in saying that, the people are beautiful, very friendly and warm. And it's a beautiful place to be in when you do get outside.
Well, what an amazing life you have already had. And we're going to be very interested in where it goes next. And so I really want to thank you so much, Jude, and an enormous burst of applause from our virtual audience. And it's just been an absolutely fascinating hour. And thank you so much, Professor Jenny Dixon, too. And so with that, I have only to let everybody know that the Fast Forward series is taking a short break. It will return on Tuesday, the 14th of September, this time at 6:30 with Michael Milojevic in conversation with Brenda McFarlane, who's the director of Jacob McFarlane Architects Paris. So head to our website, fastforward.ac.nz for details, register for the webinar or use the QR code. And with that, po marie, and thank you again, Jude Kohlhase.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you.